Among the sea of racing games that were released on the PlayStation, there are also a lot of games that many of us have never heard about before. Some of them will come off the back of re-envisionings or kind of like clones of games that had been released in other regions, but they'd be rebranded under different names. Some of them would even have different elements with regards to maybe a few additional cars or tracks, but they all looked and felt the same regarding that category in most respects. One of the games we'll be looking at here that does follow into this kind of stance would come under the name of Autobahn Racer 2, a racing game that would be released in Germany by a company known as Davalex, and this would be the second installment of the racing series. There would also be other additions that would later be added to the likes of the PlayStation 2 and even the PC and other consoles of its time. That allowed you to play as 13 different vehicles to race as, but one of the interesting aspects is that the game allows you to race along the Autobahn itself in Germany, but it also allows you to race across many different iconic cities and areas, from Dortmund, Frankfurt, Munich, Vienna and Hamburg and Berlin, where you engage in illegal street races that you can be racing in anything from the likes of a smart car with very little power to the likes of a Porsche 911 Carrera, among many other different types of quirky cars, from like an Opel Astra even to like a Ford Ka, among others. So there's a variety and a varying mix of different types of vehicles at your disposal in the game. Now this game was released originally on the PC in 1999 and was later added to the PlayStation in 2000, and from the look and feel of the game, it acts and feels more like a budget style racer, especially in terms of its visuals. Like when we compare it to other racing games that were released in and around that time, there were definitely a lot better visual quality games out there. This one here would be on the lower end of that category, and the game would be heavily criticised with regards to reviews of the time, stating that yes, the game does have some nice ideas, and the fact is that you can race through iconic German cities, and the handling of the cars is fairly decent and is beginner friendly, which it is, and it's grand for casual gamers to pick up and play. But in terms of other gameplay features and dynamics, that's where the game is really let down, as it has very poor collision detection. If the cops start chasing you, there's a very good chance, if guaranteed, that you're going to get caught, and if you get caught 3 times in a race, which more often than not you will, especially in slower cars earlier on in the game, as that's probably one of the most difficult elements, is that when you first start out through the campaign, that it's very hard to win a race, especially with cops, because once they chase you, you basically very seldom ever get away from them unless they crash into another car and you can stop in time to avoid them, but more often than not they'll just end up hitting you anyway. Once they hit you, they pull you over, and if it's done 3 times in a race, it is instant race over. But not only that, you also have to contend with the ridiculous rubber banding techniques of your opponents, because when you're a good bit ahead of them, they will appear out of nowhere and just literally overtake you. But once they do overtake you, and it's the same with other NPCs or other cars on the screen, that regarding other traffic that appears on the roads, they seem like they're way ahead of you, but even when you've passed them, or when you're just about to pass them, or even if you are behind them, even with the computer controlled opponents that you're racing against, they have this awful habit of just literally randomly stopping at different intervals with no indication that they're going to stop, or with nothing around them, and it just leads you to ploughing into the back of them all the time, which is so frustrating. So I don't know whether that was a deliberate design input or whether that is a glitch in the game, but it causes a lot of confusion, because you once they get ahead of you, you're just waiting for them to randomly stop, which they always 99% of the time will, and they'll let you get ahead of them, and about 20-30 seconds later they just whiz past you out of nowhere, and it's like as if they've got a turbo boost. And even some of the slower cars feel like they're more high-end cars that are zipping past you. But again, it will happen all over again, is once they get past you, they'll get a certain few meters ahead of you, and then they'll start to slow down to a point that eventually they'll just literally stop for a couple of seconds, you go past them, and then for them to do it all over again, and you'll have to contend with that for the entirety of the race, along with making sure that you don't get pulled over by the cops in the meantime. So I can understand with regards to the reviews that it got, as that was definitely one of its biggest gripes and hindrances, and I can understand why, because it is very, very frustrating, because even when you collide with a wall or even another car, the car stops dead anyway. But the fact is that cars will randomly just stop in front of you, causing so much confusion, is even more frustrating. Like, for what it does offer with regards to its overall handling physics, it's an easy to pick up playing game, but it's everything else that falls apart literally. But what I consider to be the worst racer I've ever played, again, it's one of those games that you do have to sit down, put time into, be patient with it, but it does require a lot of luck to get the most out of it. I will admit that, because there's no guarantees with every race that you go into whether you're going to come out of it the other end on the winning platform. More often than not, it'll be the opposite. You'll probably not win the race at all, or even finish it. but that's just the way these games were designed back then. They were quirky, they were interesting, they were experimental. That's one thing I will definitely say, is these games were definitely experimental. It could have had better visuals, but it is what it is. It has enough unique charm in it that it will appeal to some, and I know myself, even going back, playing the likes of all these older games, these games definitely did appeal to a generation of players back then. A lot of younger people growing up that got into racing games, this probably would have been their first racing game and they would have enjoyed it for what it is. I have played games similarly like this on the likes of the PlayStation 2, which I have covered over on my PlayStation 2 channel, PS2 Gaming Memories. There'll be a link down to that channel in the description. And the majority of people that did play these interesting games did like them. Yeah, they had their gripes with them, obviously, as we all do, but they still saw it for what it was. They realised that it was never going to be on the same groundbreaking level as icons like Gran Turismo or whatever, but it is what it is. It'll appeal to some, but it won't appeal to others. That's just the reality of games like this. But they're there, and people would have enjoyed them. The fact is that it got released on different systems apart from the PlayStation proves that there was some popularity behind them in the first place, so that people did play them and own them and got some enjoyment out of them, to say the least. But I would love to know your thoughts of this game if you have played it yourself. Did you find this to be a quirky and interesting race, or did you find it to be equally frustrating like I did? So whatever you think of this game, be sure to share it down in the comments below. And if you would like to see more content around other unusual and quirky games like this that were also released on the console, then leave a like on the video, subscribe to the channel, and you can also check out a playlist here that I have on screen where I have covered many other games like this that were released on the console so that you can see them in action. And as always, keep those gaming memories alive.